Do note that India is also constructing a railway line between Chabahar and Zahedan to connect the port to the rest of the Iranian railway network, which will then be linked to the international north-south transport corridor connecting India with Russia. So this is a long-term plan. We'll be keeping tabs of what's happening. For the moment now, let's turn to New York. That is waking up to the aftermath of the worst terror attack since 9/11. A lone wolf attacker rammed his truck down a crowded bike path, killing 8 people and injuring several others.
Halloween turned out to be truly horrific for New Yorkers on Tuesday. In what is being described as the worst terror attack in the city since 9/11, a man drove a truck into a crowd, mowing down 8 people and injuring several others. In a matter of minutes, a popular bike path in Lower Manhattan turned into a scene from a horror movie. Crumpled bicycles lying on the street were a tragic reminder of the extent of the damage.
We saw the car and it was like surrounded by rubble, and we saw like this. Yeah, we saw the guy. He looked like he was wearing like dark colors, and I think he had a beard, but he was holding 2 guns. So yeah, it was a little scary.
I don't know. We've been through 9/11, so I mean, but now this truck thing and the cars, using cars against people. I mean, I walk up that road every day, you know, to go to wherever, and it's. I mean, you just have to be very, very careful and vigilant all the time.
Hey, can I get the kids out?
The carnage ended when the driver smashed his truck into a school bus.
Oh my God. Horror. Holy shit.
Jumped out and ran up and down the highway, waving a pellet and paintball gun and shouting Allahu Akbar. Minutes later, he was shot in the stomach by a police officer. The attacker has been identified as 29-year-old Saifullo Saipov. He came to the United States in 2010 from Uzbekistan and has been living in New Jersey, but had an address in Florida.
I'm in complete shock, just total shock. I walk my dog. I've been here for 4 years, and I just would say hi, and he said hi a couple times. What a tragedy this was, a horrible day on such a fun day of joy for millions of kids, made even worse because it literally hit.
6 months ago, Saipov began driving for Uber in New Jersey. According to Uber, he passed a background check and did not have any rider complaints about his safety as a driver. He has now been banned from the Uber app. Saipov rented the killer truck just an hour before the attack and drove it down from New Jersey. Handwritten notes in Arabic discovered near the vehicle indicated allegiance to the Islamic State. But in the absence of any direct link, investigators are treating it as a case of an inspired attacker. 5 of Saipov's victims were Argentine tourists who had traveled to New York for a 30-year high school reunion. A 6th deceased was a Belgian national. In the wake of the attack, US President Donald Trump vowed to step up extreme vetting of people entering the country.
It's a very painful day in our city. Horrible tragedy on the west side. Let me be clear that based on the information we have at this moment, this was an act of terror, and a particularly cowardly act of terror aimed at innocent civilians, aimed at people going about their lives who had no idea of what was about to hit them. We, at this moment, based on the information we have, we know of 8 innocent people who have lost their lives.
New Yorkers made it clear that they refused to be intimidated. Thousands lined up the streets for a Halloween parade. With a spirit of camaraderie and strength, New Yorkers came out in droves, determined to overcome the tragic event. Bureau Report, WION.
The investigation is still underway. This is what the mayor of New York City, Bill de Blasio, told the media just a few minutes back.
This was an attack on the United States of America, an attack on New York City, an attack on our people. And it was the definition of terrorism, an effort to take away people's hope and spirit and to make them change. And what New Yorkers showed already is we will not change. We will not be cowed. We will not be thrown off.
Joining us this evening, Andy Rosgan, WION correspondent from New York, and Michael Kugelman, Senior Associate for South Asia Program at the Woodrow Wilson Center, with us from Washington. Good evening to both of you. Andy, let me come to you first. What's the day like, the day after rather, like in New York City, and are people going about their business? Do you see more police presence around you?
Yes, people are going about their business, but it is tense here, and I'll set the scene for you. I'm right here at the very bottom of that bike path where this truck went through yesterday. You can see the bike path. That's the end of the bike path right there. And police have sealed it off, as you can tell right there. This whole area is sealed off, basically. And by the way, we're just near the One World Trade Center right there. We don't know if that played a significant role in this attack. But right now, police are calming the scene. In fact, you just missed it. There were dozens and dozens of men and women in full-body white lab coats just going through this street, up and down the street, looking for more evidence that they could find. So security is very tight.
Was the killer on the radar of security agencies at any point?
That has not been revealed yet. There has been some speculation that he was, but nothing has been confirmed yet. I can tell you that the former police commissioner of New York, Raymond Kelly, told a radio audience just today that this suspect, Mr. Saipov, was in the hospital, is talking to investigators, and is, according to Mr. Kelly, bragging about what he did, actually saying that he had no remorse for what he did and that he wished that he could kill more people. And in his truck, apparently, they found some knives and a 15-page manifesto, I guess you could call it, that described his allegiance to ISIS and saying that ISIS would eventually win in their battle against the West. Now, we don't have that part confirmed yet. This is all coming from Raymond Kelly, the former police commissioner of New York, who's in the know. He says that he feels New York's police have done a good job in preventing this kind of thing, but he said this really was inevitable when you consider how easy it is for a man like this just to carry out what he called a very low-tech attack, just using a car to mow people down. And that definitely has the city on edge.
The president, in his typical style, Andy, has been talking through Twitter, but is he expected to make a statement?
We're not aware of that yet. I'm sure at some point he will. I wouldn't doubt it at all. There's been a lot of debate today about what he talked about the visa program that may have led Mr. Saipov, let him into the country from Uzbekistan. But that's all kind of confusing right now. We're not quite sure how exactly he got into the country, on what kind of visa. So there's been some back and forth over that. And that is opening up a whole new can of worms regarding immigration in the United States, which has already been a big controversy.
Right. Andy, thanks very much for joining us. Michael, 8 people have died, and that's horrible. And I have to say at the outset that nothing can justify something like this. But from the government to the media, everyone, we have to say, immediately called it a terror attack. Compare that to what happened in Las Vegas. The casualty figure was much higher, and people were wary of calling it a terror attack till the very end. The government never did. While I don't want to get into social media rants, but some of those people do have a point, would you say?
Well, I mean, I don't like to get into the semantics when it comes to the notion of terrorism and what constitutes a terrorist attack. My own view, which may be simplistic, but my own view is that whenever someone, goes out and randomly kills scores of people, it's terrorism. And so that's why I think that what happened in New York yesterday was a terrorist attack, and what happened in Las Vegas was a terrorist attack. I mean, in my own view, terrorism is defined by the act of committing terror. And clearly, what's happened in the United States in recent weeks, most recently yesterday, and in Las Vegas before that, clearly those were acts to inflict great amounts of terror, regardless of who the perpetrators were, what they looked like, what their motivations were. This, in my view, this is terrorism in all cases.
Could this have been prevented? And I know it's a difficult question because security agencies across the world are dealing with the challenge of trying to preempt what have come to be called lone wolf attacks.
Well, unfortunately, what makes these lone wolf attacks so scary is that, they could be done so easily with very little weaponry. All you need is a car or a van in this case to plow into a group of people. And we've seen this happen so many times in the last few months or so, mostly in Europe. I think, quite frankly, we've been lucky here in the U.S. that, attacks like the one in New York City, there haven't been that many of them where you have someone who decides to take a van and not really use major weapons, bombs or guns or anything like that. Just use a truck and plow it into a crowd. Unfortunately, I think that it's very hard to prevent those types of attacks from happening unless you manage to figure out, the type of person that may be most likely to stage an attack like that. And as we know, there's no one single profile for what constitutes a terrorist or for someone who commits mass violence attacks, mass casualty attacks. So, we've been lucky here in the U.S. Perhaps what happened yesterday will be a wake-up call, but I really hope that what does not happen is that the authorities decide to crack down more than they should in ways that could imperil, freedoms and also bring to mind concerns about profiling and singling out particular individuals just because of what they look like or what their religious views may be.
I'm going to request you to stay with us, Michael. The killer, and this is what we know about him so far, worked as a driver and lived in New Jersey after emigrating from Uzbekistan 7 years ago. Take a look at this report.
8 lives lost and more than a dozen injured as a truck turned into a mowing machine in the heart of New York City. The man suspected to be behind the terror wheel, 29-year-old Uzbek national Sayfullo Saipov. Saipov is reported to have arrived in the United States from Uzbekistan in 2010 with a poor command of English and sought work as a truck and Uber taxi driver. He lived in Ohio, Florida and New Jersey after obtaining a green card that enabled him to work in the United States. For the past 6 months, he worked as an Uber driver. Uber has released a statement confirming that Saipov was one of its drivers, saying he had passed a background check. Saipov has now been banned from the Uber app. He is reported to have been living most recently in Paterson, New Jersey, about 40 kilometers northwest of the scene of the attack. Records show Saipov had multiple interactions with law enforcement in several states. He had traffic citations issued in Missouri and Pennsylvania. He was arrested by the Missouri State Highway Patrol in October 2016 after a warrant was issued when he failed to show up in court for a misdemeanor offense. He paid a $200 bond, which he forfeited when he didn't show up in court for his next hearing in November. A guilty plea was entered on his behalf. According to the New York attack probe details so far, Saipov acted alone after being inspired. That view was supported by New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, who told a press conference there was no evidence to suggest a wider plot. Saipov was shot by a police officer while attempting to flee minutes after the attack and was whisked away to a local hospital. If Saipov's Uzbek origins are confirmed, he will not be the first person from the Central Asian country to be accused of plotting terror attacks in the United States. Last month, a Brooklyn man of Uzbek origin was sentenced to 15 years in prison for plotting terrorist attacks, including threats to kill former President Barack Obama. Bureau Report, WION.